Welcome everybody. In this video we're going to get a little bit more in depth with dimensioning in Fusion 360, and we're going to look at some more techniques for creating a little bit more complicated designs. So like with almost all of my designs, I'm going to start by creating a sketch. And we're going to look at what's called dependent dimensioning in this video. So let's say I know I want to make a hollow container. This could be something like a big tray, it could be something like a case, it could be something like a tall, narrow box. One of these things all these containers have in common is that they're basically, the sketch you're going to need to draw to make them is basically two rectangles. And so let's say I know that the inside dimensions of my container are going to be 30 by 30 millimeters, which is pretty small. And then let's say I don't know how thick I want my walls to be. So what I could do is I could draw an undimensioned rectangle around my 30 by 30 millimeter rectangle, and then I could dimension that rectangle with respect to the first rectangle. So I'm going to hit Escape to get rid of my rectangle tool. I'm going to hit D, and I'm going to select a distance between each of the four corresponding sides of the rectangle, and I'm going to say let's start out with 2 millimeters. That's for something of this size, that's a pretty reasonable size. And you can see this undimensioned rectangle, or this undimensioned, I guess it's going to be a square when I finish with it, it's a rectangle right now, is changing as I add these dimensions. And so when I have dimensioned all of these to 2 millimeters, and I can sort of scoot these out so that they're out of the way, you can see that it becomes a square. I can inspect these sides here and see that they're all 34 millimeters long, which is 30 plus 2 on either side. So what I could do here is finish up this sketch and extrude it. I'm going to make another shape just to show you how this works with circles as well. We're going to do a 40 millimeter circle. I'm going to add a circle that shares a center with it, and I'm going to dimension them relative to each other. And let's say this one has a little bit thicker outside wall. It's going to have 4 millimeters. So I could hit Finish Sketch, and now I'd be ready to extrude these. And so you've probably noticed this, but when you extrude your first, let's say we want this one 40 millimeters tall. When you extrude your first one, the sketches disappear. You can control the visibility of everything over here on the left. Like I said, you may have already figured that out, but in case you haven't, that's the way you do that. And so on this one, if I want to have a little base here, I could highlight this interior part of the sketch, extrude it by 4 millimeters, which is the same depth as the walls, and then I've got a hollow cylinder here, which I could add embellishments to. I could round it out if I wanted to. You can do these. I just hit the Q key. You didn't see me do that, but this press pull popped up over here. I could fillet this, which is something I do to a lot of my designs to make them look a little bit better. I could come up here, fillet the top. You can hold down Shift to multi-select when you're doing these different operations. So I've selected 2 edges there. I'm going to give them both a 2 millimeter fillet, which means they're going to meet in the middle on that. I'm going to make this sketch invisible because it's bothering me, which means that they're going to meet in the middle there. And now I've got a nice little a pot for a tiny, tiny plant, a 40 millimeter plant. So a couple of things I want to sort of reiterate on this is in this sketch, I used relative dimensioning to make sure that there was a specific amount of space between these two shapes. When I finished the sketch, I went ahead and extruded a couple of different parts. This is something you've done, controlling sketch visibility, so that I could actually get everything I needed. And then the other thing I want to you to take away from this first part is you can multi-select. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm just hitting Control-Z to roll back I could roll back the timeline. So if you hold down Shift, you can select multiple edges, and then I can run the same operation on those multiple edges. So I hit Q. Q's a great shortcut to know. It lets you do both a fillet and a push-pull. If you select an edge and you hit Q, it's going to be a fillet. If you select a face and hit Q, it's going to be a push-pull. Those are 2 of the most common modifications you're going to be doing once you get your sketches done. So I did that here. I'm going to hit 2. Because I've got a 4 millimeter wall and I'm filleting both the inner and the outer edge, a 2 millimeter radius is going to cause them to meet in the middle and give me sort of a nice rounded top there. And I could refillet this if I wanted to. And you can get pretty extreme with these fillets. I think probably the biggest I could do here is 20, which is going to give me, that's actually going to cause a problem. Sometimes you can fill it in such a way that your shape ends up being let's say, rather improbable. That's obviously not what we want to do. So let's see, 15, 10 is about the maximum we can get. You also need to be aware when you're doing these big fillets, it can cut down on the amount of material because it's cutting stuff off. So you might end up, if you are working on a part that's going to have to withstand stresses, you might end up with a part that is unexpectedly weak in certain places. Now, something you can do if you've got a fillet like this to strengthen it is you can actually fillet the inside, and that is going to bring it in a little bit. So if I do a 10 millimeter fillet, that is going to match the interior and exterior surfaces, and it's actually going to give me a little bit more material down here. And this is kind of hard to see, so I'm going to do something we haven't done yet. So I'm going to run that fillet. I'm going to right click on here, and I'm going to go over to my bodies. I'm going to right click on my body, and I'm going to change the opacity to something that is not 100%. So that is going to make the body a little bit see-through, and that's going to give me a better ability to judge, if I look at it from the side, how much material is there. And so you can see there's actually a good amount of material. This lighter gray is all of the area that has that is actually filled in. You can see that there's a pretty good amount of material all the way around. And if I undid this last fillet, so let's go ahead and actually let's just roll the history marker back. There we go. You can see that right here I've got a very small amount of material between the outer wall and the inner wall of this. So adding that fillet on an interior edge actually increased the amount of material. Adding it on an exterior edge reduced the amount of material. So that's a little bit about sort of advanced sketch dimensioning, or let's say intermediate sketch dimensioning and intermediate filleting. But there's one more thing I want to show you about sketch dimensioning before we finish up here. And I'm going to go back into my sketch. I do not want to redefine the sketch plane. I want to edit the sketch. And I am going to look at this square. So say I am going to make a square container here, and I decide that I want my wall to be a different thickness. I want to have a 3 or a 4 or a 6 or a 1 millimeter wall instead of a 2 millimeter wall. The way I've got this set up right now, I am going to have to change all of these 4 dimensions to get the thickness of the wall to change. You'll notice when I click on this sketch dimension, it gives me a name for it. It tells me that this is dimension D6. So I can actually change this dimension here to, instead of being an absolute value, I can say I want it to be the same as D6. And you'll notice it says f of x here. It says fx, which means that it is derived from another dimension. So I can change all of these to be D6. And where's my last one? Oh, there it is. So when I change this one dimension, all the rest of them are going to change. And it is going to allow me to, by changing one number, change the thickness of my wall. So let's say I wanted to do something a little bit different. So first we're going to say we always want this interior space to be square. So we can set this to equal to D1, which is this dimension up here. So anytime I change this, it's gonna stay a square. And let's say I always want my wall to be 1/10 the thickness of the interior space here. So this is D1. This is the one I'm actually setting. So I can make actually all of these distances between these two lines a derived distance. And so I can say I want this to be D1 over 10. And I can say I want this to be D1 over 10. I'm going to do the same thing for all of these. Not that one. All the wall spaces. Where are the other ones? There's one. There's 1, 2, 3. It feels like I'm missing one. D1 over 10. There we go. Okay, I got all of them. And if you arrange your sketch dimensions a little bit better, you will have an easier time than I did of figuring that out. So now if I change this to be 60 millimeters, all of a sudden my walls are all 6 millimeters. If I change this to be 20 millimeters, all of a sudden my walls are all 2 millimeters. And this can be really, really useful if you are building something that is a little bit more complicated, and you need to ensure that certain dimensions or certain parts are going to maintain a size relative to one another. So on this, it lets us keep a constant relative size between the wall and the interior space. But we could dimension this circle relative to this square. We could make sure that they always increase together. Maybe these parts need to fit together, and we want to make sure that if we increase the size of one part, we increase the other. Maybe we've got a sketch that we're using to make a cut in something, and we want to make sure that our wall, the smallest amount of thickness we have on the outside of the material, never gets smaller than anything else. There's a lot of different reasons we might want to use derived dimensions or relative dimensioning, which is where you're dimensioning one shape in terms of its relationship to in terms of its distance from another, as what we did initially. So that's sort of the main content for this video. I also just want to remind you the other thing we did here was work on managing our fillets so that we maintained a good amount of material. We worked on changing the opacity of our individual objects, and I'm going to change this back to 100% opacity. You can also change it all the way down. I find under 50 to be almost impossible to see. Now this just looks like a little wireframe. And we learned how to apply operations to multiple faces or edges at once, which can frequently be a time saver, especially when you're doing filleting, because filleting is something that you frequently do to a lot of different surfaces. It also, I'll say one more thing about the multi-select application of things like fillets, is it creates one operation in the timeline. So if I wanted to change both of these together, I now just have to do that once, right? I could have done these two fillets, so I'm actually going to delete these. I'm not going to rename them. I'm going to delete them, and then I'm going to do this fillet with a multi-select as well. So I am going to select this interior edge. I'm going to hold down Shift, select this exterior edge, hit Q. I'm going to fillet them both at 10 millimeters, and I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to look back inside just to make sure, yep, that did what I wanted to. So now if I want to change this, I can just edit this single feature, and I can say, well, I want a little bit less, but I want to make sure that it gets applied to both the inside and the outside equally. And it's going to do that because I multi-selected when I created the feature. Okay, so that's some more intermediate dimensioning and object manipulation techniques. And that is going to be it for this video. There is actually no skills check here. So as soon as you make it through this video, you are good to go on to the next one. So thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions or if there's anything you didn't understand, feel free to raise your hand and we will take a look at it together.